Welcome to the Georgia Forestry Association's Market Minute, a brief analysis of the top issues impacting the forestry community in Georgia and the United States. U.S. home building and permits surged in December of 2020 as historically low mortgage rates supported the U.S. housing market. According to recent data from the U.S. Department of Commerce, housing starts jumped 5.8% to 1.669 million units last month. Single-family home building, the largest share of the housing market, soared 12% to 1.338 million units. Single-family starts have increased for 8 straight months. So we caught up with the Bowtie economist, Dr. Elliot Eisenberg, to help make sense of the numbers.
Thanks very much for that warm introduction. Housing starts have done very well for themselves. But the point to remember here, and this is really important, is that I think housing starts are peaking out. Remember what happened last year. Early in January and February, in the first half of March, housing starts were the best that they had been in 10 or 12 years since the housing bust. Then, of course, in March, April, and May, they nosedive, and then they come back. And they come back stronger than they started. So they started here at 60 miles an hour. They come down to about 30 miles an hour, 25 miles an hour, really pretty slow crawl here. Then they rocket back up and they go about 90 miles an hour in July, August, September, October, November. If you compare where we were in July, August, September, October, November, December, compared to the prior year, when there was no pandemic, of course, that gap between those 2 years, July 20 here and July 19 here, and so on, August, September, October, November, were quite constant, meaning we had accelerated starts. They went up, but the gap from the prior year was fixed. So we went from 60 to 30 to 90, and now we're at 90 miles an hour. This is a terrific performance. It's doing great, but there are bottlenecks to how much better it can be. Total employment in residential construction is back where it was. So we're in a labor shortage situation, even though unemployment is close to 7%, and we're coming out of the $22 million person job loss last March and April. And we're still 10 million jobs behind where we were. On top of that, lumber is very expensive. Land is hard to get. So there's a lot of impediments in the way of builders. Moreover, the whole generation of workers didn't enter the field. Back in 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, no one was going into home construction. So we're short bricklayers and carpenters and electricians and so on and so forth. Making up those losses isn't easy. So while any one firm can go hire workers from another, that doesn't increase the total amount of production. If you look at starts, if you look at permits, they're all flat, high, but flat. Moreover, even if you look at existing sales and pending sales of existing units, they're in the same situation, 60 miles, 30 miles, 90. There's nothing more for them to sell. Inventory is very low. So the housing market as a whole, no matter how you look at it, first-time mortgage apps, existing sales, permits of new homes, and then sales of new homes, they're all very, very, they're high, but not improving. The only way to improve it is to bring more workers into the story. And that's a long-term proposition, right? As far as the forestry industry is concerned directly, the demand for housing is going to remain very strong. We have very low interest rates. We have a shortage of homes of about 4 or 5 million units that's not being chipped away at. It's not getting any worse right now. If we build 1.6 million units a year, we're at where we should be. But we have a decade where we were underbuilding by 400,000 or 500,000 a year. So there's tremendous demand. Demographically, it's very favorably inclined. The younger millennials and the oldest Gen Zers are now starting to age into home buying. There's a huge cohort of them out there. And credit right now is actually hard to get as it returns to where it was prior to the pandemic. This will enable more people to buy homes. And we just, President Biden just announced that the DACAs are now going to be eligible for FHA loans, increasing demand that much more. So there's tremendous demand. It's just we need supply. So I think that the demand for builders will be there, that the builders will continue to be building homes at this pace, and maybe they'll be inching it up every year by 50 or 60,000 as more workers become available and so on. But none of these processes happen immediately overnight. Increases in supply don't happen that quickly. It takes time. But there'll be this long-term demand going on for sure.
A groundbreaking study recently published in the journal Scientific Reports finds that wood produced in the southeastern United States for the EU's renewable energy needs has a net positive effect on U.S. forests. From 2005 to 2017, an international team comprised of researchers from Sweden, the University of Missouri, and Resources for the Future conducted an assessment of over 100 procurement areas where wood pellet mills purchased timber. The study found that the expansion of markets for wood pellets yielded several positive trends, including a net expansion in the amount of carbon stored and a downward trend in the number of standing dead trees. We spoke with Francisco Aguilar, a professor at the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences, to learn more about the study and its impacts on the forestry economy in the United States.
So what we did was look at the forest inventory and analysis database, and we looked at conditions within timberlands, including carbon conditions and other conditions like the number of trees, number of dead trees within kind of the wood baskets that we have around pellet mills, specifically wood pellet mills. And we follow that trajectory in terms of carbon, in terms of basic forest conditions within timberlands between 2005 and 2017. During this period, as you might be aware of, some of you might be, the European Union implemented a renewable energy directive. So this was adopted in 2009, and since then there has been a major growth in the exports of wood pellets, which are utilized to generate electricity in the EU, coming from the US to Europe. Within the Renewable Energy Directive, there are stipulations about the sustainability of the biomass entering the EU. And so one of the basic sustainability criterion is that carbon stocks should not be depleted, so that biomass can indeed qualify as an eligible energy source, energy under the Renewable Energy Directive of the European Union. And so in this study, what we looked at those conditions, and we found that the overall carbon within large-scale wood pellet mills within the southeastern coastal U.S., so includes Georgia, systematically there were higher levels of carbon within those procurement pools, within those wood baskets around wood pellet mills. A couple of take-home messages from this effort that we completed with colleagues at the University of Missouri and Resources for the Future, both in the US. So there was this net positive effect, which in one direction it points that markets work. I mean, you can have an incentive for this raw material to be procured. That creates an incentive down the road. So it's an incentive to grow it. There is a market. There's a market that is willing to pay for that raw material. So that creates an incentive to grow it and regrow it. So that's one interpretation that we offer, is markets work. Now, interestingly enough, of course, over this time period, there have been a number of developments in the market. For instance, now when it comes to certification, for instance, it's even more widely adopted now. When it comes to sustainability certification granted to the biomass that's used into industrial facilities in the EU. There are other programs like the Sustainable Biomass Program, SBP, that now they use things like certification and other metrics to ensure the sustainability of the biomass. So the market is actually working in that direction, and it's something that I, over my time studying the industry and observing the industry from the outside as an investigator, I fully recognize, and I think the industry has been very sincere, very, very honest in making sure that stewardship is practiced throughout the supply chain. And I think that's something that shall be highlighted, because the EU, when they implemented the European Union, when the EU implemented the Renewable Energy Directive, it didn't say it has to come from A, B, or C country. It said it can come from anywhere as long as you meet the criteria. And of course, the US was poised to meet that criteria, and there's no other country today that can do that as effectively as the US is. Therefore, that's why it's in fact the number one source of industrial wood pellets coming from outside the European Union entering that market.
That's all for this week's Market Minute. Follow us on social or become a GFA member today to stay up to date on all the news, policy, and research that are adding value to your forestry investment every day.